All right, we're live. Casey, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good to
For
see you,
sure.
Casey.
I've
Likewise.
been really excited for this conversation. I've been following you for many years now across various podcasts and the writing that you do. So it's a real honor to have you on our podcast. And the timing for this is great because you recently took over basically my whole LinkedIn feed for a full day announcing your recent round of funding and the public launch of SuperMe, which is really exciting. I was lucky enough to kind of get, I guess, like invited from the waitlist a couple months back and had a chance to play with it. And I was like, wow, this is like so different and also so interesting. So now that everyone can like go and check it out for themselves, wanted to have a conversation diving a bit more into the vision. So for those who maybe are not super familiar with what SuperMe is and why you started it, can you maybe just kick us off with what is the vision here with SuperMe and like the kind of professional network that you might be looking to develop and why that's interesting to you to spend so much time on right now?
Yeah, sure. So, we're trying to build an AI native professional network. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you have a profile that is interactive because it's trained on everything you've ever said, right? So this could be podcasts like we're doing right now. This could be blog posts you've written. This could be AI meeting notes, Google Docs, Notion Docs, things of all that nature. And when you build a profile on that, then you can basically have a conversation with it, right? To learn about that person, to see if you want to hire them, into your company, or to get personalized, advice from them. And for people who have, a decent amount of content, like I might have on like marketplaces or growth or product stuff, we can kind of go full agentic and start giving you personalized advice if you tell us what your problem is. And what's been pretty cool about people using the product is that they tell us a lot about what their problem is. They give us a lot of context, which we weren't necessarily sure they would. So we started by building this profile that you could interact with that was just way deeper perspective on the person than anything that has existed on the internet. And we built on top of that expertise search. So if you don't know who any of the three of us are, but you have a business problem, you can just come to SuperMe, type in your problem. We go find the appropriate people in the network. Their AI profiles will automatically, answer for them, and it feels like you're getting inside a group chat of the best possible experts, for your business problem. And we built it this way, and we call it perspective search because that's how we saw founders operate in the real world. When they have a problem, which I can tell you, I have new problems that come up basically every day. They go and, talk to like 5 different people to get multiple perspectives, and then they make up their own mind about what they actually do. So that's the way we designed SuperMe. I think what drove us to this were kind of a few trends, in the market. So one is that we felt like a lot of the best operators had shifted from talking about what they were learning in public, over in the last decade to shifting that knowledge a lot more private, right? So as these public spaces became more algorithmic heavy and rewarding like virality over nuance, the best operators retreated into, like Slacks or, WhatsApp groups to actually like help each other. And that made all the newer insights on how we're building products and, how we're learning, unavailable to the public internet, unavailable to people without like the perfect network already. And then with all of these, LLM chat products coming out, the AI assistants, instead of giving you multiple perspectives, we're just giving you an answer. And that's like great for facts, but it's not really how business knowledge works. Like, so there's kind of this weird thing that was happening as like we shift from blue links to answers, we're losing multiple perspectives, on our problem. And for business questions, there isn't always a perfect answer. You get, a bunch of different um, perspectives from people who have kind of been in similar situations, and then you got to make up your own mind. So we wanted to kind of bring back that sort of element that you used to get from Google search by clicking on, 1 and 2 and 3, except make that obviously a lot faster with, the best possible sources. And I think where SuperMe shines today is where there's a big gap between what the top 1% do and what the average do to like solve a business problem, because that's, who we focus, on indexing. So,
And the atomic unit, I think, in the product experience, from what I can tell, to be able to achieve that bridging of the gap, I think, is what you guys call insights,
Correct,
right?
correct, yeah.
So when you basically set up your SuperMe, you ingest a bunch of these data sources. I think it's like over 100,000 insights that have been ingested into my SuperMe,
Mhm.
which means someone can go to my profile and basically, if I've ever said anything in any of those insights that applies to their question, that will get pulled into, like they can basically pick my brain to some degree without me having to do anything. But also, if they don't know about me and I've talked about anything in those insights, they can go to that perspective search. And what I love about your UI for perspective search, I dropped a question in there yesterday because Mark and I are starting to think about doing some we want to think about how to grow the podcast. So like we're
Yep.
basically I went in, I'm like, hey, like any advice in here about people that can help us grow this podcast? And I won't get into like the specific, content of what it came up with, but the format of what it came up with is people's little faces pop up in line as that like insights are pulled from those people into different places. And what's cool is I can kind of go deep if one of those people, if I basically want like, oh, like that perspective really resonates. I want to go deeper on who this person is and learn more about. I can go and chat with their super me. And I compare that to like LinkedIn, I guess. Like there's no way for me to do something like that in LinkedIn as far as I can tell. I don't know if that's the exact comp I should be thinking of, but
Yeah, I
Googling
I
wouldn't
think that's
quite
fair.
give that to me either. It's a
So I
whole
think
new way of thinking about accessing knowledge.
I think attribution is like core to how we built the product in a couple ways. So if I go directly to your super me and ask you a question and I get an answer, it's going to source that back to where you said those things so that I know it's grounded in your real life lived experience and not like a hallucination, right? And if you do a perspective search, we're going to summarize what the best experts on our network think about your problem. And we're going to attribute all of those back to those individuals. And you can always read their individual perspective, which will be sourced back to exactly where they said, those sorts of things. And I think it's important that humans get the credit for, what they are contributing to business knowledge, right? The products that have been built lately are not really designed around that. So everything we do at SuperMe is kind of like centered around it's this human and you should trust them for these reasons. And they said this at this point in time, and that's where we're pulling it from. And that also lies into the design of how that human who said that receives the feedback on their content, right? And that anytime I go talk to your super me, you're going to see a record of that conversation. And, if super me didn't really nail it, you have the ability to chime in and improve that answer. I would get emailed that new response. Your AI profile would get trained in the future with that response. So it gets better and better. These are not like replacements for your brain. They're an extension of your knowledge that helps you get more visibility on it, scale, how many people you can help, and hopefully, get better business opportunities down the line.
Yeah, I think that feature around you getting access to the questions that people ask to your profile and then getting visibility into the answer is really cool because you can continue to filter, like just make that answer better, but also
Totally.
gives you signal on like, what do people perceive me as an expert for, right? And almost kind of like be like, here's actually the thing that I bring value to the world and what the world needs, which then you can take that and maybe either position yourself like that in your
Yeah,
next
yeah.
job search or maybe in your advisory. So I think that's really cool. And I'm
And
very
you can create content on SuperMe too. So you could like make posts about things. So if you get asked a question that you want to go deeper on, you could just make that post natively like there, write about it more. But yeah, sorry, Mark, keep going. Or Casey, did you want to react to that?
Yeah, well, I just think what you said, Mark, resonates, and that what we found is like the best operators are like the worst marketers with their own expertise. Like when we started, you know, um, showing early people super me, they're like, well, what the heck do I know about? And I'm like, dude, you are like the smartest person in the world on like these 5 things. But there's either a lack of awareness and almost like faux humility, or there's just like this blank piece of paper problem of like, well, what the heck should I talk about? I'm pretty boring, sort of thing. So people come to you and essentially prompting the human instead of prompting the LLM on like, hey, I think you have my perspective, you have good perspective on this question. That helps people like, oh yeah, it turns out I do have that. My super may or may not be aware of my perspective, but now I can just like chime in and record a voice note or type up something or, share a Google Doc where I've talked about this. And now, I'm able to help people on more topics, and that makes it more visible that like, oh yeah, I actually am pretty smart about, that random thing.
yeah. I mean, the thesis also resonates with me that I it's the reason why Super exists too, is that, yeah, there's way too much noise out there, right? And it's sometimes hard to find like the right groups where there's a signal. And what I've noticed with a lot of like Super members, that they're really good at what they do, but as you said, like they're terrible marketers. One, and I also, they just, like, you look at their LinkedIn profile and be like I know what you've done at these companies, but you just haven't shared any of that with
Yep.
anyone, and you only know if I ask you. But then the other thing that's interesting too is because they're so committed to their job, right? And they're just doubling down on what they do. They don't really have time to be like, hey, like, let me write about the shit that I'm doing that's really cool and impactful. I'm like, no, I need to worry about how I'm gonna, add a zero to my revenue line. So, um, I'm curious how you think about that problem, right? Because I think it's really hard to get those people to prioritize, adding knowledge.
Yeah.
So how do you think about that? Yeah.
Yeah. So look, I've been blogging since 2010, and I built a habit around that. And, I built a habit of being able to identify like what topics I'm working on or talking with people about that I should basically turn into something that's fit for public consumption. And most people are just not gonna build that habit. It's hard, even though I built a habit around that. I maybe write 6 times a year, like it's not something you can do every week. Um,
This is Casey
and
Accidental.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just
Good thing
my
I picked it
blog
up.
Substack, and I still don't feel like I'm great at it. I've had some stuff I'm proud of. I had some stuff I'm not very proud of up there. Fortunately, no one reads the stuff you're not proud of. So like, there's asymmetric upside to writing, it turns out, but a lot of people are scared that what they write isn't going to be that good. And so there's all these things that prevent, a lot of our peers from getting their insights out there, and the world is worse off for that, right? So our approach is like, dude, you don't need to become a full-time content creator to get your next job, but you probably need to market yourself better than you're doing. Not only to get your next job, but to recruit the best people to work for you. Like, because there's going to be a ton of options for the best people. And so any way that we can help, automate, um, you know, getting a better understanding of your presence and your expertise out there to other people without you putting in a ton of extra work is really interesting to us, right? So
Mm.
you showing up in perspective search, you don't have to do any work for that. We've just got a bunch of your latent content. We can figure out, what you're relevant for and what you show up for. If you're pulling in, your private notes and things like that, one of the things we work on is basically translating that into a public form of consumption that automatically trains your profile. You don't need to figure out how to write a blog post on it. We're like, hey, we found these insights. We redacted the metrics, the names you don't want. Approve this to ingest in your profile. Later on, we might figure out how to turn that into like public content for you as well. Um, but we're trying to separate like the amount of effort it takes, because I think for a lot of people, if they want to become like someone that's really good at content, that itself is a full-time job. And we know people who have decided to make that full-time job and they've done very well for themselves, but that's not realistic for most of the people in your community. That's not realistic for me. But that doesn't mean you can be like, oh, well, it's too hard, I'm like bowing out of the game entirely. Because if you bow out the game entirely, like your career is just going to be like worse off. And people who aren't as good as you, people who don't have as much knowledge, are going to get better opportunities than you because they've figured out some way to build more of a public presence for themselves, whether that's through podcasting, whether that's through writing, you know. And so we're trying to say is like, look, we can get you a lot of that opportunity with a lot less effort. Sync your sources, and we'll showcase that expertise in a lot of these automatic ways that don't feel like it's, well, now I got to write another LinkedIn post this week to stay relevant, because like ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, I think probably that's a challenge that you're facing too, but that we definitely face in Super as well. Is that, to me, one of the most useful things that people can share are artifacts. Either, let's say like a simple one is like career ladders, or maybe it's like a strategy doc, right? Or
Yep.
just or like a board deck that you're sharing. But trust is so, like, I think getting that trust to share it with people, and then trusting that, like in our case, like our community, or in your case, your platform, to do the right thing with that content
Yeah.
is really hard. And because sometimes might be breaking like, confidentiality things for your company, which of course we don't want people breaking the law. But I'm curious, like, how do you think about like creating that trust early on, where people, like, especially for those operators that are busy, they're like, oh, it'll be so easy to just share an artifact to make sure, hey, like, we're gonna do the right thing here. We're gonna redact that. We know what's confidential. We're redact, as opposed to
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
having the person to go through everything manually.
Well, yeah. I mean, first off, it's giving people the visibility, right? So if you sync granola, for example, to SuperMe, we don't, just ingest those notes. We say, hey, it looks like you talked about this topic a few times. We went and wrote something inspired by those notes. Here it is. Do you want to ingest this? Prompt edit it directly, or just, add it to your SuperMe, right? So you have that complete, visibility into the process. And that will help you understand, like, yeah, SuperMe understands my role in this, what type of stuff should remain private, what type of stuff it should be redacting. And then, maybe 6 months down the line, they auto approve new granola notes because they know how we use it, appropriately. And I think the reaction so far is some people are like, as soon as we like showcase that feature, they're like, hell yeah, smash that button. And some people are like, hell no, right? Like, I'm scared. I'm scared, right? And that's just the nature of kind of new products and AI, right? We don't need everyone to say yes. Eventually, it will become more normalized. And I think what I learned at Pinterest is at Grubhub, I was encouraged to blog because my manager was like, all this stuff you're doing, which we didn't even have a name for yet. They're like, it's really interesting. No one in the world knows about it. Like, you should talk about it. And then when I got to Pinterest, I already had a habit of blogging from Grubhub. And I was like, I was going to keep doing it. And hopefully no one at Pinterest is upset. And, then Ben one day, like, he came by and he's like, oh, that new blog post you wrote was really cool. And the CEO of Pinterest at the time. And I'm like, okay, I guess that means they're okay with it. But I think, Pinterest just had an intuitive understanding of the recruiting value of me doing that. And part of, what that did, and not just me, John Egan as well, who was also blogging, Danny Chu and Ludo had done some talks as well, is it positioned us as one of the best growth teams in the world, that work. And I think, Ben intuitively understood that. And I was like, of course, I got no problem with that. That's not going to be every company, that listeners work for are going to take that same point of view. But, employer brand is actually pretty closely aligned with employee brand in a lot of our cases, especially as you get more senior. And so a lot of times your employer is like, yeah, if there's a way that you can figure out how to take our private work and make it public in a sanitizable way that helps us get better people and, all of that, like, yeah, this is like exactly what we want. And so that's what we're trying to make easier, for everyone.
I don't say I've never understood the employer reluctance to encourage this kind of thing, because every time, I remember when you were the CPO at Eventbrite, I suspect that drove an influx of people that wanted to work there because they liked the way you thought about product. I think back to Clairvaux at Launch Darkly. I'm
Yep.
thinking about, like, I don't know, Elena Verna working with Lovable right now. Like, I think there's a lot of people whose personal brand and the company that they're working for, like, I think of Aman Khan with Arise right now for people, like, teams looking to work with evals. Like, so many people want to go use Arise as their platform because they heard about it through Aman. So I'm curious, like, what's your take on, are there any scenarios in which a company you think would not want to encourage, the leaders within that company, the operators that are like super thoughtful and smart about various things to talk publicly about what they're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the exercises we did at Eventbrite is we went and rethought through our cultural values. And so I built a spreadsheet of like, hey, there's a spectrum on a bunch of these attributes in terms of, how you want to operate, a company. And there's not like right or wrong answers. It's just what makes sense for, your leaders and the strategy of your business. There probably is a more perfect, alignment for different companies, right? So one of those is kind of like how open versus closed you are with the market about what you're doing, right? And Apple, one of the most successful companies in the world, is incredibly closed. Not only do they not tell the world until they're ready for the big marketing reveal at all what they're doing, they don't tell the employees unless you're directly working on that, like what's going on, right? And obviously that's worked out quite well for them. And there's reasons for that I won't perfectly articulate, but when it's hardware oriented, you're leaning a little bit more that direction because the timelines are longer. So there's a little bit more trade secret elements to strategy than, say like a pure consumer network business like Pinterest, right? There's the competitive dynamics of the market, things like that impact how open closed you're going to be. But we have some of the biggest companies in the world, and you have like Meta, which is like extremely open. You have Apple, which is extremely closed. Obviously, both have had pretty winning strategies for like the last 20 years. So like if you're Apple, you're probably gonna be more resistant to some of these elements or in certain business units of an Apple compared to someone else. So I think there's definitely viable reasons for it. I think the more you lean B2B SaaS, the more you're going to lean towards being open as a way of customer acquisition and trust building, like these days. But in certain other areas, like security, like hardware, maybe not as much. There could be alternative approaches that are as open as, let's say, Elena has been with Lovable, but it has to be aligned to kind of your company strategy, the natural way your company operates. I think the bad way this works sometimes, which is probably a little bit more what you felt historically, is that they're not used to it. And so like legal gets involved or PR gets involved, and they want to have this level of control that actually doesn't aid either of their strategies, right? So when I first started advising Eventbrite and I wrote about something we did, legal was like, you can't mention Eventbrite in any blog post ever. So I just went to Julia and I'm like, here's why this doesn't make sense for you. And she's like, yeah, it doesn't. But you can't expect legal to like understand how like
I mean, their job is risk mitigation, not to
how
maximize
employer brand
upside,
and
right?
recruiting is changing, and things like that. Like, yeah. So I think that's something a lot of people miss as they grow their careers is, whether you're in a product or elsewhere, is like a lot of the onus on you to explain why this is an appropriate thing for the company when what's appropriate for companies changes dramatically given the landscape. And so that's something, I had to do a lot as a head of growth at Pinterest. Like no one understood how growth teams worked in 2014. Like you had to do a lot of evangelism internally to try to get people to understand how this is different and how you don't just build features all the time. And I'm getting more people to use your feature. That's cool. You actually want this, type of stuff. And same with, kind of when Eventbrite wasn't really hip to kind of like talking about the internal workings of the company publicly, opening their, thinking to an alternative approach. And a lot of people, when they hit that, they're just not going to push back. And then that means they don't blog, they don't go on podcasts. And that's a missed opportunity for them as well as generally for the company's brand.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mark. Curious where you want to go.
I was going to take it a different direction, but yeah, I'm curious what are you going to say?
No, I think it makes total sense. I mean, we recently had Claire from Maven on the platform and talked a little bit about like how people should think about teaching in parallel with a full-time job. And we're going to have Mallory, who's like I guess like head of marketing. She's one of the marketing leaders at Maven, come and talk about like branding for product leaders. And
yep,
I just think like the theme here is if you could, it's like not having a public presence of any kind just seems to me like it's not like future proofing your career. I mean, there's just like so many people that could do various jobs or could be eligible for certain opportunities, but if they don't take some of that risk of putting themselves out there to like increase their surface area of luck, right? Like that's kind of what this is.
yes.
People won't think about them. And when I was I don't know if you knew if you're familiar with Continuum, but I was the head of product and design at a fractional executive marketplace called Continuum. And we, so we had companies, venture-backed companies coming to us looking for an advisor for something or someone that could help them solve some kind of problem. And we'd have, all these incredible executives that we'd onboarded to the platform, and we'd look at their profiles and be like, I think you're the right person for this, but like your profile does not tell that story at all. Like you need to get better at telling your story so that these people could find you organically through our ecosystem. And there's just like this reaction of people have felt like it was cringe to like market themselves.
100%.
And I don't know. The thing I tell them is, okay, sure, might some people see it as cringe? Maybe, but like I've been writing online for so long that the upside has outweighed the downside by like orders and orders of magnitude. I'm guessing it's been the same for you, but do you feel like for most people it's just about getting like dipping their toes in the water and getting over that initial like whatever that story in their head is about how this goes south, just getting through that, pushing through it, and then starting to build the habit, and then they're off for the races? Is that generally what you see with people that are doing a good job of telling their story more
Yeah,
publicly or sharing more publicly?
totally. I think for a while, they probably didn't feel like they needed to, especially if they had the right early resume of, Stanford, Google, Meta, et cetera. It felt like doors were just always opening for them. And I don't think the next, 10 years are going to be as easy in that regard. But I think, let's say they get to the next 10 years of their career or their 15 plus years into their career, generally they're aware of the value of that in some way. Some are, when we talk to them, they have this like, well, I'm number one, why try harder, sort of feeling. And it's like, in the back of my head, I'm like, you're not number one. And like, good luck with that over the next 10 years, right? Like, I'm just going to watch a bunch of people whiz by you. But I think, generally outside of that, most people, they're interested in this. They know they should be doing it. They don't know where to start. They have their day job, which they have some level of confidence in. And this is like totally new and scary. And they perceive more downside to it than there actually is, because they feel like the cringe or whatever. They're not sure where to do it. They need to go through a level of product market fit on like, given their types of content, which way of representing that works on which channels, right? They have not really done self-promotion, so that feels awkward or inauthentic, to them. They can't look like they're trying too hard. That would be bad.
Comes
And they
off as
feel
like
like
desperate, I guess, is the fear. Like I don't look desperate. Like
yeah, I
yeah.
can't look desperate. I need to be projecting that I'm already successful, and if I get started, am I going to be like stuck on this content treadmill where I need to be like posting LinkedIn updates every day or something? Because I don't have that much time. I don't have that much like unique content. They're stuck in this where they're like, that's holding me back, but I definitely want to be seen as an expert in my field. I definitely want to be able to recruit better and eventually get recruited for some better stuff myself. I'd like to make some extra money on the side if I don't need to compromise my values for it. I want to stay relevant, and I actually like sharing my knowledge without feeling, like I'm like selling my soul or something, or like sharing like company secrets, things like that. So most people are in that give and take of, yeah, Casey, I know I should be doing it, but there's all these things I don't know. I probably need, it's like, it kind of feels like I'm building a 0 to 1 product of my own content, and, 0 to 1 products are hard. Our approach is like, well, look, I can probably drop 80% of those challenges for you with what we're building. Um, and even if I didn't, I would be pushing you to spend, more effort on it. You don't need to quit your job like Claire and become a full-time content creator. That's not the answer for most people either. But there's a happy medium in between, and we can make it a lot easier to get there and to help you. And one example of this was, I was advising full-time before I started this company, and at one of the companies we were recruiting for a head of growth. And the the head of product, like amazing resume, amazing background, but she's like, hey, you have a network on like growth leaders I don't have, like help introduce me to some people. So I did that, and some of those people were like, yeah, and this is like a good company, by the way. It's like, not the hottest AI company in the world, but like obviously good company, obviously tier one company. And people would be like, oh, I don't know, like my job is good, whatever, and some of those people would not want to engage. And I'm like, I'm thinking like, it's really dumb of these people not to be trying to build a relationship with this head of product, regardless of interest. So that's something people underinvest in, is just building good network connections. But then she went on a podcast and she talked about her management style. She talked about, just stuff. And then some of those people came back and were like, oh, I actually would love to chat with her. She sounds amazing. And it's like, first off, I already told you that. Um, uh, but B, for her, it was like, I already thought I was doing enough, but just making that extra effort and, the impact on kind of the deal flow of good candidates, it was like, oh, I need to be doing even more. Like, wow, the impact of this is like so tangibly felt immediately. And so a lot of people don't have that A/B test of like going and making the extra effort and seeing how it impacts a lot of the things that they care about. And I can't run that A/B test for everyone, but you see it just time and time again.
Yeah, it's almost like, yeah, knowing that it's like kind of not paying attention to personal brand is like almost like knowing like, hey, like go to market is important. And but I only have a reactive sales engine, and I don't know anything about marketing or proactive like sales, if you will,
Yeah,
in a
it's like
weird
a
way.
product person being like, I don't need to learn about the business. I just build cool things for customers. It's like, dude, that may have worked at like 2016 at like one of the biggest companies in the world for a while, but like you are past that phase. You got to understand every element of building a business, and that matters for your career as well. You got to understand your career is a product. You need to be mapping all of the elements about making your career a successful business with extremely strong and durable like product market fit. And you can't just be like, I'm so good that like the marketing takes care of itself, because that might be great for helping you get senior PM jobs or whatever, but it's not going to help you get the top tier CPO job or whatever, 5, 10 years later.
Yeah, and I think that that kind of brings me to the next point. The two problems that I see with like kind of like professional networks in this space is like one that we've already talked about, like kind of like it's too noisy. It's hard to find the signal. The other one is that I think people are craving more of like the personal connection, if you will. Like for example, like that example that you shared of like that head of product and you offering for people to talk to them and then like not taking up on it. But those connections, meeting one on one, having those conversations and maybe seeing where that takes is so important. So I'm curious, like, how do you think of that part of yeah, like that of the professional network for SuperMe? Is that something that's top of mind of like how do you because in a way I could feel almost like that it could feel very impersonal when you like talk to someone's AI agent and then like
Yeah.
the text is doesn't have personality. Like it's just yeah. So how do you think about that?
Well, our plan is to inject a lot of your personality into those responses over time. But if you think about it as like lead gen, not replacement, with that the AI profile is supposed to do is help you understand like this is the right person, right? And then we're going to build more and more tools to help you connect with that person, right? So
Nice.
that could be like, contextually like, oh, offering the ability to jump on a call, right? Obviously offering the ability to follow them and see the new content they create, things like that. And that harkens back to maybe 15 years ago, right? Where, I was working on a lot of growth stuff at Grubhub, but I was in Chicago. I wasn't connected to, the broader Silicon Valley ecosystem where, it turns out a bunch of other people were doing like cool stuff in a similar vein. But I found out about them because I was writing about growth and they were writing about growth. So we connected, largely back then over like Twitter and built relationships, online before I ever met like most of those people, in person. And that just doesn't happen as often anymore because like the reach of that content, if we still created it, would be like hidden behind, all the viral video stuff. And um the the underlying principle of this is like in business is like game recognizes game. If you're out there talking about cool stuff and it's cool and it's cutting edge, other people that are doing cool stuff that's cutting edge will recognize that your stuff is cool and cutting edge. So how does SuperMe facilitate that over time? Some of the early stuff we're going to do is like, and this is what a bunch of people told me when I was originally sharing the product is like, hey, who are you talking to? Those are the people I want to learn from. Like, who do you think is great that I don't know? I want to know those people, right? So we're making that stuff visible. Like, oh, Casey just had a conversation with Ben, right? People are like, oh, I don't know Ben. Let me see, who Ben is, that sort of stuff. Let me follow Ben. I can get in touch with Ben, all that kind of stuff. And I think we'll play around with more ideas in that regard over time. Because I think what most of the people I talk to, I don't know how you feel about it, but most of the people I talk to that are early in their career, they come to me and they're like, oh, I'm looking for a mentor. I want to talk to people who have like been where I'm trying to go. And first off, in my head, I'm thinking, well, like, I never had a mentor. Two, I'm like, you're definitely not going to follow the career path I followed. My career path is totally weird. I'm like, what you should do, and what was valuable for me, is I knew all my peers and we just shared notes all the time. And that was way more impactful than someone 10 years ahead who like the game will be totally different that I play from what they play anyway, because things change too quickly. Um,
Also, for that outreach, like having a specific like show you've thought about something, you've kind of taken it to the far to like the end of what you know how to do, and you got to some kind of point where you're like, I'm stuck on this, or I'm torn between these two options. I thought of you as someone who could help me for these reasons. Like you talk about this. Do you have any thoughts on like how to even think about which one to go with or which questions to ask myself to figure that out for myself? Like that's such a better question to ask when you reach out to someone than like, are you willing to mentor me about this? Or like an open-ended question like, hey, how do you think I should go about this thing? You know, like it's just like your hit rate for getting a response can be so much higher. So if
Yeah.
someone can like go and chat with my SuperMe first and basically be like, hey, like I talked to your SuperMe for like 30 minutes. Here's where I think you generally lean on this problem I'm thinking about. Like, does that generally sound right to you? And I can just respond with like, yeah, that sounds right. Or no, oh, hold on. Like you're misunderstanding what I said about this. I can correct the record. And also
Yeah.
like that new way of trying to get mentorship seems like it's going to stick so much better.
Totally. I think what surprised people that join the platform that have, a lot of, awareness or whatever, or people emailing them is before, those emails, a lot of them would just get unanswered because you don't have the time to jump on a call. You don't have time to give the personalized advice. But when your AI profile does it for you, it's very easy to chime in on top of that because the AI has done 90% of the work of what you would have said. So you not only end up helping more people, you actually end up personally responding to more people because the AI has done the majority of the work, even if it wasn't perfect every time. And that was not something we like totally intuited when we started the business. That was like feedback we got, over time. And I think that will continue to be important because, a bunch of the people like, yeah, we want to help. Um, but, if you get 100 of those emails a day, like there's just not enough time in the day in addition to like what your actual, job is. So that scalability of the advice for people who do have that deal flow from more junior people, I think has been a nice value of the product so far. But also, we got roles we want to fill as well. We're not always looking to find someone that's 25 years into their career. So the fact that we can see, wow, this person asked me the smartest questions I got all week. And this is something I used to do through Reforge, right? So I'd be like teaching my Reforge case. And then, someone would ask us smart questions and I'd just write down their name and then I'd go check out where they were working and if I could just recruit them. So that is a way to kind of obviously get more of that advice, but get super tactical on what you're looking for, and also showcase that like you're worth building a relationship with because of the intelligence behind your questions and the types of business problems you're working through. So I definitely agree with that.
A
I mean,
quick
that could
anecdote
be,
on that I'll just share. One of the jobs I got, I talked to an engineering leader, and it was an interview. They were supposed to interview me,
Yeah.
and we showed up, and we spent, I think it ended up being a full hour with just me asking them questions and continuing to check in with them every like 5-10 minutes, being like, hey, I know I've been asking you questions, but you have like, I'm happy to answer your questions. Like, no, let's keep going. And like we spent like a whole hour with me just asking them questions, and they ended up like giving me a strong like pass for that interview. And I remember after I joined, I was like, why didn't you end up asking me any questions in that interview? And they're like, I got more signal about you from the questions you were asking me than any answers you would have given me to the questions that I asked you. And I just thought that was so interesting. And it sounds like that was just coming to mind as you were talking, is like the quality
100%.
of questions people ask is very interesting about them.
Agreed.
Yeah.
yeah, I could see like almost super me getting really good at being like, hey, this is a unique question that maybe you should either follow up on or there's a gap. So I think in a way to like helps you pushes the edges of your thinking and be like, hey, maybe here my thinking is not very clear and it's probably beneficial for me to get more crisp on what I want to say here or
Yeah.
which I think is really cool. I mean, I'm curious to talk a little bit more about like, you've been an exec in a bunch of places. You've advised founders, and now you're building this company. And I think what I'm interested in, and I'm curious if one direction is pulling you more than the other, is one is like, how are you building an AI native company, and how is that different to how you've built teams in the past? That's one. And the other one is like
Mhm.
kind of like, what are some of the most interesting lessons you've taken from founders and you're taking with your journey? I'm not sure if there's any that's more interesting to you.
If you're enjoying this conversation, please check out the links in the show notes to support the podcast. Mark and I do this out of love, but to keep it going, we also need your support. Thanks, and now back to the episode.
Yeah, sure. So on the AI native part, I think there's two elements. There's an element of kind of product strategy, and there's an element of kind of the operations of a company. So I'll talk a little bit about the product strategy. If I forget the second part of the question, which I always do, just remind me.
Yeah.
So I think what was important for me, seeing kind of the first wave of AI companies coming up was that they had a lot of fast growth and they had like a cool magic trick. But as someone who's been through like a few of these waves now of like internet and mobile and cloud, I didn't see how they had a chance of being like an iconic company 5, 10 years down the line. And that was for like a few reasons. One is, well, the incumbents are get more on top of it every cycle. The incumbents did quite well on mobile, and the incumbents are like way on top of it with AI. So they just copy anything that's working that is actually innovative from startups. And that AI is just making it easier to build. So that means you get more competition from other startups and incumbents like a lot quicker in the cycle, right? So if you think about like Dropbox and how eventually, Google and Microsoft and Apple woke up and was like, well, that should be part of our ecosystem. They all built competitive products. Dropbox already had like $1 billion in revenue by then. Now, like you hit 10 million in revenue, and like the incumbents launch a competitor, and there's nothing you really have like sustainably different from that. You just came up with the idea first. So I think for us, it was like, look, we're only interested in building a company if we could build something defensible over the long term and have a chance of being something really iconic. And for us, given our backgrounds, Ludo was my engineering peer at Pinterest and head of engineering at Whatnot before this. It's like, we know network effect businesses, and network effect businesses are like a great form of defensibility. And so if we're going to be building something in AI, it has to be network oriented first. It has to be building across that network effect. It has to be building with, unique data in mind. And so that's one of our cultural values, is network or bust. And I don't really see that a lot of other, AI native companies so far, because in the first wave of a cycle, it's pretty easy to grow, via word of mouth, because like your magic trick is cool. And it hasn't been done before, but it gets normalized pretty quickly. And a lot of people that fail to capitalize on that is they can't sequence to growth loops that they can control over time, or they don't have long-term durable product value that's different from what the market can offer. So that was one thing that was like incredibly important to us. The other thing that's important is riding the wave of AI capability at the appropriate level, right? One of our frameworks is kind of like, there's the current way of doing things. There's the best that AI can allow you to do things today, which might be like a half measure towards where it's definitely going to go long term, right? Which is like a lot of people in AI have called like one shot, solutions, right? So if you're building today, a lot of times you can promise the one shot solution, but like it's not going to work. So you'll get like a lot of people try it and then a lot of churn. But then also the flip side of, if you like go build a half measure, you can go really quickly. But then when the one shot becomes more technically feasible, you're not actually in a strategic position to jump to that very easily. So the important thing for us is like, you need to build with the tech, with not only with the technology in mind of what it can do today, but it has to sequence to the even better thing it can do long term. So you have to have like the half measure has to find product market fit on a path to the one shot, solution of whatever you're doing. So whenever we're building something, it's kind of like, what's the exact cutting edge of what it could do today? As we think 12, 24, 36 months out, how is that going to evolve? And how are we building something that's like going to nail both through the same effort?
So does that
And
mean? Sorry to
yep,
interrupt, but does that mean that you'd be comfortable? Because every decision is kind of a trade-off to some degree,
mhm,
like whether to ship it and accept a subpar result in the near term because it's going to be better in the long term and you'll be well positioned to capitalize on it when it gets there,
yeah,
versus to not ship anything in the near term and wait until it's the right moment to ship it. So are you like, when I look at the decisions you guys would have made over the last like 3 to 6 months when it comes to like ship versus don't ship,
yeah,
there's a mix of things that you've chosen to ship, even though they're not exactly at the level of kind of like delight that you would want them to be at. But the bet is that models are going to get better, they're going to get faster, they're going to get cheaper. So within maybe like acceptable time frame, well, this will have a wedge for this part of the experience, and we'll be able to just like make it really good fast when the
yes.
models catch up. And then some things you're like, probably not going to get there in the next year or two. So we're going to hold off on like even trying until we get there.
Yeah. Or does this thing we can do now help us learn how to nail the thing in 2 years in a meaningful way? Right. So,
Mm.
part of, what you mentioned earlier, right, is like the AI profiles are heavy human in the loop. Like you're going to see all the responses. The AI is not going to nail it exactly the way you would have said it every time. You have the ability to kind of chime in and, give it more of your perspective to train on. And, that's something we'll probably have forever, but it's incredibly important right now because we just don't always have the fullest picture of like how your brain thinks about all the different problems. Like I remember when early on when I launched my AI profile as like a test, someone asked me about Notion's expansion into like new products, right? And so, Casey AI did exactly what it's supposed to do when it doesn't have content on it. Be like, I don't know. And, so I got the email and I'm like, oh, well, I actually do have thoughts on that. And I have a framework behind those thoughts that Casey I didn't know to make the connection to, right? Which is, of course, B2B, like suite expansion, strategies and things like that. And when you need to do them, and are they even still relevant with AI? So I just filled that in as kind of like a new answer. And, maybe in 24 months, the next generation models would have been automatically capable of detecting this is a B2B SaaS suite expansion problem. Here is Casey's framework on B2B SaaS suite expansion and how it applies to Notion, because I understand Notion as an entity, as a late stage PLG B2B SaaS company, right? The model, at least back then, couldn't make those 2 or 3 leaps to give the answer that it probably should have known without me. So I just chimed in and added some like additional training. But it probably won't need real Casey's help to do that in 2027, maybe not even 2026.
Another example is I recently went to my SuperMe and I think there was a prompt in the product to like set your voice.
Yeah.
So like someone can chat with my SuperMe and have it sound like me. And I love how like scrappy that onboarding flow was. So like props for scoping that. But it was basically say something like this with this kind of tone for 20 seconds. And then say something like this kind of tone for 20 seconds. And I was just like sitting in my bed, like talking to myself and following your like voice guidance. And I was like, look, I've got like hundreds of hours at this point of like video, like this podcast and these talks, and I teach a course, and like there's like way too much content from me online at this point. So like that's another example that I was like, oh, this is an interesting trade-off. Like, why not give me the chance to maybe either upload like an audio file of a podcast that I did, or like give the product like a URL to like something that features like a 60-minute lecture that I did, and just like pick up all the voice from there. But is that another example of like one of those hard trade-offs that you thought about, ingesting it, but you chose to just have people?
So we did that, and getting the secondary voice samples wasn't getting as clear a signal. So like, obviously you all have above average amount of, voice content on the internet, but it's filtered through YouTube or Spotify or something like that. So it wasn't giving as strong a quality signal as direct mic input, whether it's on the web or whether you use the iOS app. Sometimes we will go and fill in with those incremental sources if for some reason the voice sample directly from, the app or the website wasn't as strong, and that does help. But yeah, like voice cloning models are not perfect and they're going to get better every 6 months. And we're not going to be obviously a voice cloning company. We're going to continue to benefit from their providers as they get better and better. But the first version was like, we had you talk about a topic for like a few minutes. And then we ran into, that problem of like, people were like, I don't know what to talk about. I don't have anything interesting in my brain, And so then we switched it to that model, and people could just like follow the prompts, and we could get, a pretty clean voice sample every time. Whereas if we're like, hey, we're just going to go check podcasts you've done and pull voice samples from that, sometimes your audio mic wasn't good. Sometimes, the video quality that was uploaded wasn't great. And then that impacts like the quality of what we can represent. And then you get your voice and you're like, oh, it wasn't that great. And then we just go back to saying like, we'll actually just record some direct stuff into the mic and it'll fix it. So that was definitely an evolution.
And I'm sure it's not the final state of where it's going to be, but it was interesting because as I was going through that, I'm like, I'm not super proud of like what I sound like to someone chatting with me here, but I feel like it's better for me to have this than not to have this. And then the moment that there's like an upgrade to the way that like my voice works, like I'll already kind of be familiar with what this is. Like I don't want to be left behind. So many people don't want to be left behind on like a product that they want to actually invest time into, that it's kind of like take full advantage of it. And then I was just like, the 0 to 1 PM in me was like, I totally see why this is the right way to start now, even if it's not like 10 out of 10 perfect, something I'm proud of. It's the right starting point to get there.
Yeah, and it's just a variable, right? So some people go through that thing and it's just like sounds exactly like them, and some people go through it and are like, this isn't really This isn't really them. And of course, you don't control the entire stack on how to fix that. So in your case, like we could just go backfill with more of the podcast episodes, and it'll probably help fill in the voice more. But in some cases, people who aren't podcasters, there aren't as many of those like ready samples available on the internet.
Yeah, I thought you were kind of going. By the way, I think this has been kind of like a really interesting kind of masterclass on strategy. But I think your point on network effects and also how a lot of these AI tools and companies are like just basically like one trick pony that are getting disrupted by incumbents. Like I look at the prototyping like space, right? I'm like how Figma is catching up, and
Yeah.
at the beginning they're like this, Figma maybe was terrible. Now actually I'm seeing like a wave back of like a lot of people going, starting to use it, and it's getting a lot better. And I'm curious, like, are there any like other like network effects, like AI startups that you look up to that you think have done it right? And maybe if it's not in the network effects related world, like any other like AI native companies, you're like, okay, like these people are really thinking long term and have a moat, and I really like how they're doing things.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's a little bit too early to tell because there's two ways to think about it. If you come out with a magic trick, and have you all played like Minesweeper?
Or like where if you click on the thing and there's a mine there, you lose the game.
Yeah.
That game. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So like a Minesweeper, sometimes you'll click on an empty space and a bunch of the board will just open up for you. Um, and it allows you to go in a lot more different places. So I'd say there are some companies where like they've clicked on a feature. It may not be a full product. They've clicked on a feature, but it opens up the board. It earns them the right to do more stuff, either with the data it collects or with the workflow it's now a part of in the users' lives. So then the question is like, how do you use that advantage to sequence to something that might be more durable? Might be unique data, it might be multiplayer, whatever. And it's a little bit too early to tell if a lot of those early PLG AI companies, what kind of wedge was created for them, and then if what they do with it is going to be, meaningful and defensible over time. So I would say I like what Granola has done in how they've thought about the meeting, in that on paper, that was a very crowded space. And they're like, well, what if I just come into that space with incredibly high taste and think through the perfect UX? Don't really care about the viral loops, because it turns out if like I have the right UX, people will just talk about it and I'll get word of mouth instead of the direct viral loop. And now that I've done that, I have all the data from a lot of these PMs or founders that maybe I could build an operating system around, that maybe I could build an education company around. There's like a bunch of things that opens up for them. Now, what they're going to do with that, and if any of those strategies end up being interesting or defensible, I don't know. Too early to tell. But I think I can see how I could fill in the rest of the strategy to go build an iconic company there. Um, with some other AI startups, I'm like, you're growing really fast and you're absolutely dead on a 5-year time horizon. Like it's kind of like how I would think about many others. Won't get into like naming names
Without naming any of those companies, of
Yeah.
course. Are there any like themes that lead you to that conclusion? Looking at a company that they're like definitely on the
Yeah,
path to dying.
yeah. So I think I launched a half measure. It's viral. It's churny, but people do like it. And someone else definitely is building directly toward the one shot. 12 months from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, I will not be able to get to where they're going. So I have this default spot in the future of, if I don't pivot or expand my offering or dramatically redefine my product market fit, I know I'm surpassed, whether it's by the model companies directly or some other big incumbent. Like I know I don't have a default path forward. Those are the ones I worry about. And there's enough time, it's early enough where they can figure stuff out. But like the straight line of their future doesn't look good, right? You need to believe something else changes on a long term time horizon,
So it's almost like about
likely
the
initiated
product
by them.
market fit of their wedge. Like almost like the initial offering, that half measure you're calling it, like the point solution thing that no one looks at it and is like, that's a $10 billion company. But if everyone loves it and they're talking about it, that's a good leading indicator that there's a there that's you're opening up
Well, I would
optionality on
say
the board.
that probably isn't enough, right? Because if everyone's loving it and talking about it, and that makes the space interesting to 100 other founders and incumbents who have strategic advantages either in distribution, either in technology, or a combination of the above, And you absolutely know, like take the Figma example, that they're going to be able to leverage those strategic advantages to build something better on a longer term horizon, even if what they initially launched as competitors a lot worse. Then if you don't have an answer of like how we have a different segment we win, or we have a different value prop long term that we win, that's where I feel like a lot of those are not going to play out. And I think this is exactly how things played out in mobile. If you were old enough to remember, there's an app for that commercials. The early apps that they featured on those commercials, they're dead because they were fun magic tricks that were like good to display the capabilities of a phone. They weren't Uber. They weren't DoorDash. They weren't the strong network effect business. They weren't Snapchat. They were these like, one trick pony, style of apps. And they went viral and they had growth, and some of them raised a lot of venture capital, but like they weren't the thing that mattered, long term. And that's why in a lot of ways, I still feel like AI is very early because probably most of the things that are going to matter haven't been built yet. Yeah, obviously ChatGPT probably matters, right? Claude Code probably matters. But there's a lot of the surface area still hasn't been dreamed up yet, as we're learning what these things not only can do and can't do, but how what they can do and can't do evolve, which is a little bit different from the mobile phone.
I mean, I think it's the granola example is such a good one because it's not doing anything that's like extremely complex or difficult for technically speaking, right? Like, I mean, a little bit, but like it's not wow, like earth-shattering like technical difficulty. But I think the product is one thing that they were very smart about. I think the other thing is that they had these little insights that they capitalized on. For example, like the fact that people hated when people would join your like a bot would join your Zoom call, and the fact that hey, it records by default, and then that kind of starts to build like a crazy amount of data on meetings and then you can do a lot of cool things with that. So I think they just nail a couple of like little like in hindsight, now with in perspective, like, oh, of course, like they were like big things, but when you get started, they're like, oh, these are small details that maybe don't matter that much, but actually ended up making probably a big difference for them.
And that's created some brand preference because now all the competitors are copying those details because they're obviously correct. So now you have not a durable technical taste advantage, but maybe a durable brand affinity, and you're wedged inside some companies that are not going to churn. So it's like, well, what do you do with that? Can you build something iconic out of that? Because this thing alone, it was just the price of entry. Now you probably figure out like the real thing. And I won't pretend to know what the real thing is for them. I'm more of a consumer network guy, not a B2B SaaS guy, but it's going to be interesting to watch that play out. I wanted to get back to your second question, which I knew I would forget, which was around like
things you've learned.
I think, founder inspiration.
There's like a second part to this answer that you also kind of teed up, but was like, what do you learn about the execution part of things? We can skip that part.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, okay. So I'll touch on that. I'll touch on that quickly, which is, so I think in order to be an AI native company, I think there's a few things that we've tried to do. One is onboard everyone like an engineer. The cost of coding has dropped so dramatically that everyone in your company should be coding basically daily. So one of the things we did, which I'd say is probably less controversial now than when we did it, a year ago, is we brought on an operations person as one of our early hires. And the first day we're like, so here's Cursor. Here's how it works. I know this onboarding is going to be awful. I know you're not going to understand any of the concepts. Doesn't matter. This is going to save you 90% of the time for any task you want to do. In a lot of cases, it's going to save you 100%. And when it's 90%, like I'm just going to teach you like the Excel work to get you the last like 10%. So then we went through a bunch of stuff and we were like, okay, how would you do this? Without prompting from us, how would you do this? And then we'd be like, okay, we're going to show you how to do it in a combination of Cursor and a couple other productivity tools, and how that will be like 90% faster. And, within a week, that person is like shipping live changes to the product. And, their default of how they solve everything is through code, even though they had never taken a computer science class, before. And, our designer, she shipped our homepage herself using Cursor. And now a lot of people have switched over to Claude Code, which speaks to the defensibility of AI products.
You can still use that within Cursor if you want. I mean, it's,
yeah, totally. But it's basically like, look, your default solution to business problems should be code. And that is definitely not how I ran things at Eventbrite. It was like, look, code is a preference because it's most scalable, but code's expensive. Now it's like, no, code is cheap and more scalable. So why are we ever thinking about, solutions that aren't like, code first?
By the way, are you screening for that in the recruiting process of like, what do you think is the likelihood of them to be able to work this way? Or are you looking
Yes,
for
great
expertise?
question. So I think a lot of people when AI first hit were like, well, why would I ever hire junior people anymore? Senior people can get so much more done, with AI. And I think we've gone a bit of the opposite direction because we are like, look, we can teach junior people are already more AI native by default, and we can mold them into exactly how we think the future of work should exist at SuperMe, right? We're not fighting a bunch of biases that's calcified on how they like to work. Um, Basically what we're scanning for is not necessarily that you like already do a bunch of projects yourself in Claude Code or whatever, though that would certainly be an insightful thing to learn in an interview process. It's more that we can shape you the way we want to shape you.
Like
Uh,
eagerness, curiosity, hunger, like willingness to do what it takes. Like
Bias to
that's the kind
action.
of, yeah, bias to
Yes,
action.
for sure. And we're, of course, not the only company that's done that. There's been some larger companies like Shopify that have said, like, I don't know what's wrong with the rest of the industry. We love hiring junior people. But there was a wave of like, people coming out with CS degrees, even from top schools, just like weren't getting offers and stuff, which is like the first time that's happened in probably since like, 2008, 2009, like the recession.
It probably helps
Um,
that you and Ludo are just like really senior. Like you guys are executives in your own right, so you're probably not looking to hire for like that like you don't need to hire that most senior person for their
yeah,
expertise,
yeah, for
right?
sure.
Like
Yeah. So, I mean, in the case of that, like in the case of that particular role, I've done everything that person needs to do in my career, many times over. Now, the way we're doing it is going to change with AI for sure. But I know what good looks like, right? And, I've managed product teams, design teams, research teams, all that stuff before.
right, if you were
Um,
a 25-year-old founder who has never done this stuff before, you'd probably be thinking differently about like the way you might want to hire than given where you sit now.
yeah, I think that may be true,
Hmm.
depending on what skill sets you feel like you need to bring in and the value of the been there, done that versus, well, how that's going to be dramatically different in the age of AI anyway. So
Hmm.
maybe that 10, 20 years of experience isn't very relevant. It's going to be too
True.
slow,
True.
that sort of thing. And in terms of how growth works, in terms of how sales works, a lot of those things are being rewritten. So there are a lot of things where I feel like my 20 years of experience is extremely relevant. And, there's a bunch where it's like, that's not relevant at all anymore. Like writing SQL queries. Like I used to be pretty good at that. I don't really need to do it a whole lot. Like it just gets written for you, or are you writing Python scripts anyway now to do the same job? So there's stuff like that where like if people are like hell bent on doing it the old way, it's actually detraction their experience. I'm not saying all old people like myself are useless, but um, you need to kind of look at the trade off you're getting in terms of been there, done that, understand the strategy, know how to allow us to skip a bunch of mistakes we might make on our own, versus like they're working in the most optimal way for how we're going to build this business moving forward, and how resistant they are to bringing a beginner's mind to that, because there's a lot of areas where you need that beginner's mind.
So it sounds, yeah, like onboarding people to code right away. That's something that's you're doing differently now. Is there anything else that comes to mind that's of significant impact to you that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's this other element which is related to granola of like there used to be like more of this like compartmentalized data around the company, and really the way we operate is that like every meeting that's happening is a meeting you can be in because you can just read the notes, and all those notes are shared for everyone across the company. So there's kind of this operating system around the company that's shared with everyone. So we had a process at Pinterest. I believe we might have lifted it from Stripe, where anytime there were more than two people in a meeting, someone had to write notes and send those notes to notes@pinterest.com. And everyone had access to notes at Pinterest, and people would just like filter them. And then like, at the end of the day, go read all the meetings that happened and like click into any ones you wanted to learn about. But it was a lot of effort, right? Like someone had to go take the notes. So I used to try to write the most entertaining and engaging notes, which means you were more likely to read mine, which means you were more likely to understand why the growth team was awesome. And that took a lot of time. And now that just is a thing that happens automatically for every person. So it was always aspirational, I would say, for PMs to be like, I don't want to go to the meeting, but I'll take the notes. I'll take the notes from whoever goes. But then you're like, is someone actually going to take notes? Are the notes going to be any good? Am I going to lose the context? And now that just like natively works with AI. So there's been a bunch of scenarios where it's like, oh yeah, 3 weeks ago we talked about this thing and I just searched for it in granola and found it and then started working instead of needing to wait until I could talk to Ludo, Casey, or something like that. So that feels very different and beneficial.
Yeah.
And you're basically that you're encouraging that in the onboarding basically for people. Be like, hey, it's basically like is that's baked in your values or the way you operate.
100%.
Cool. Just to kind of close the loop, and then we'll start wrapping here on the original, I guess, like second question of the founders that you. It's like I feel like how many indentations are we in the outline?
Yeah, for sure.
But kind of going back to maybe like the first order indentation. When you, I mean, again, you've had this front row seat to so many founders. Are there any other things that you kind of maybe used to get at maybe like a rational level or as like an advisor that's like it made sense, but now that you're in it, is either striking you as even more true than you thought it was because you're experiencing it in a maybe a surprising way, or things that you thought were true that you're now realizing are much more nuanced and maybe don't apply to like how you want to show up as a founder?
Yeah, a ton. So I'd say one is I've reported directly to a bunch of founders and I've worked with a bunch of founders as an advisor. And I think one of the things you learn from that is it's impossible to bat 1,000 as a founder. There's so many things going on. You have to prioritize some things over others. And whatever decision you make, you're going to feel the pain of the other thing that you didn't make the time for. You know what you should have done in that area. You just didn't have the time for it and it goes off the rails as a result. So I intuitively knew that going in. That was going to be a thing. That I feel like I have a good idea on how to nail so many different elements of this job, but I'm just not going to have enough time for it for all of them. And I'm going to make hard trade-offs. And whatever decision I make, I'm going to feel the pain in the opposite, direction. What I did not understand is the emotional toll that takes on you. um, and so, I'd say a lot of my career, it was just focused on problem solving, whether it's people oriented or strategy oriented. It's like, what's the problem? Okay, what are we going to do? Like, so even when, Eventbrite's revenue went below zero and it looked like the company might not make it, it's just like, okay, I'm not like panicking. I'm not emotional. I'm just like, okay, well, what do we need to do to like go solve this problem? And, we did a bunch of things, which I've written about to save the company. And what feels very different about this when the product isn't humming or when that mistake happened over there and you knew that was a mistake you were supposed to avoid and it happened anyway, I get way more emotional about it than I've been my entire career. So I'm like, what are these feelings? I'm not supposed to have feelings at work. Like what? And that's just something that like I don't think like, me working at a bunch of early stage startups with founders or me advising like really prepared me for. Because I think, founders are good at hiding it most of the time. But like dealing with that part and managing it and figuring out how to use emotion as a way to show that you care to the rest of the team without being like, this guy's off his rocker, like what's going on? And balancing that feels very new to me. And I think that's just hard. That was just hard to intuit before like you're in it.
Do you think that's hard because like your personal like identity is tied to the company, or is it because also like
yeah,
you're like the buck stops with you, so you're ultimately like everything that happens you're accountable for?
everything's my fault as the founder. And this product is an expression of my skills and taste and point of view. And when there's something out there that I feel like don't reflect my skills, taste, and point of view, you're basically telling the rest of the world you suck in ways that you don't believe. So you're like, that's not me out there. Like that's inferior to what should be happening.
It's like a dissonance.
Yeah, totally. And that's very unpleasant in a way that's just, I don't really think about even at like, 0 to 1 products I built before inside companies, like just don't feel that way. And yeah, so I definitely wasn't prepared for those sorts of feelings.
And then anything that you feel doesn't like things that you thought would be really important, or like something that just struck you as like, oh, I have to do these kind of things to be successful, that so far, and I would consider you like what you're doing so far to be successful from my perspective, like anything that you don't think has served you so far as like useful?
Interesting. So I think one of the challenges at trying to build a network company 0 to 1 is that unlike enterprise SaaS, PLG SaaS, or even marketplaces or consumer subscription, there isn't really a well-defined playbook to get to product market fit. Like, we could walk through the steps in a lot of those other models of like, you do this, your chances are pretty high. You might have made some big mistakes that mean you're not going to be a great venture outcome or something, pick the market or things like that. But like, there's this. And then as I talked to a bunch of the consumer founders, they were like, you just got to try shit. There's nothing, there's no playbook. And I'm like, there has to be more to it than this. Um, and sort of the feeling was like, hey, it's vibes, like go try stuff, see what works. And having gone through that process now and feeling like, I'm on the other side with something that we have confidence in and has traction, I do not agree with that advice, like, at all. So what happened is I was doing that and I was being like, oh my God, I'm so terrible at this. Nothing's working. No one cares. So I had a conversation with my former boss at Pinterest, who now is full-time executive coach. And she's like, I should coach you guys. And we're like, we're 0 to 1. Like, what's the value of executive coaching? But I was like, all right, we'll try it. So then in the first session, I was just like, Kat, why am I so terrible at this founder thing? Nothing's working. And I don't know how to use my skills to help. And she was basically, in a much infinitely nicer way than I'm going to say it, being like, why are you being such an idiot right now? You have a ton of skills that are relevant to solve this problem. You're just not using any of them, which is you got to build a process and you got to like validate your ideas and you got to run hypotheses. And, I was kind of like, well, those are big company things for 0 to 1. And she's like, that's not true at all. Right. You need to adapt them to the stage that you are at, but you need to be running a process to know if this is the thing you should be investing in. And for us, like, we always knew what our North Star was. We knew what we were building long term. It was more of what's the Kindle that's going to allow us to unlock that, right? Was where the question was. And so she's like, build a process. What are all your ideas? How long is it going to take to build and test that thing? How are you going to validate or invalidate it to move to the next one? So then I like did that. And that helped me have the hard conversations, with Ludo, my co-founder, like, this ain't it. Got to move on, and eventually get to the thing that we're like, yes, that the response is starting to be different here, to the people we talk to. This is where we want to double down. And so I feel like that, like, look, it's all vibes. Like, you just throw shit at the wall and it either goes viral or it doesn't. I'm like, I firmly disagree with that advice that I got. And look, there were some people that gave better advice than that, but like, that was a little bit more of what you naturally heard from people who have created billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar outcomes, right? And so I think if I were trying to like give this advice in the future, I would be a little bit more like Kat and being like, well, I would think about how to build some structure here on like, oh, well, this is the weakest part of your thesis. Well, how do we like go run a bunch of experiments on that with sort of objective go, no go criteria? And as we switched into that, it really helped us out.
I think anyone that I know who's told me they've been successful through something that sounds like vibes, if you actually double click into like, okay, like, so like the series of decisions, like what were the phases? You almost like break down the chapter in which they were quote unquote using vibes. It's like, what did you guys actually do during that chapter? You might put them back into a mindset where they can start to kind of define the steps that they took. But because I think like it's a drunken walk in a lot of ways for the first, while looking for product market fit. And one day you're there and you have all these new problems and you kind of repress. It's like the first 2 months I was a dad. It's like I was just repressed. I don't remember it.
Yeah.
Stuff happened. Definitely happened. And like,
I feel like that's right. Yeah, they blocked it all from memory because it was too painful. And I think so. We of course knew of frameworks, right? We knew Pinterest originally built a product that did work. No one bought anything, but people saved a lot, so they doubled down on save. Same thing happened with Instagram. They built the whole social network. The only thing people did use was the photo filters, so they doubled down on photo filters. So we knew that sort of stuff. We knew obviously comfort tools did for the network, all that sort of thing. But there was, and then we knew some of the early go-to-market stuff, which was relevant in focusing on like initial communities and categories and things like that. But I think there were some of those are definitely being rewritten with AI in the appropriate way to like go 0 to 1. And we didn't originally have a way to like absorb those key learnings and have them switch us in different directions and things like that. And so it was more like, I need a process. Everyone told me there was no process for like a while, and that was like killing us. and then eventually got someone, and Kat was a founder as well. So like she had that experience, she had that relevance. And
What's Kat's full name? I just want to make sure that we
oh,
could
Kat
give her
Lee,
a shout out. Kat Lee.
Kat
Okay,
Lee. Yeah, yeah.
we'll include
Lee.
her in
Yeah.
the show notes.
So she had managed me before, worked with Ludo before, started a company, and then now is a full-time certified executive coach. So she had all of the circles to help out in this particular problem.
Way
And
to
it's
go, Kat Lee.
still our coach today.
You crushed this one.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
This has been incredible. I know we have to start wrapping, but two final questions before we get to the quick gratitude corner. Casey, where can people learn more about what you're up to? And then the second one is like, how can people be helpful to you?
Yeah, so obviously the answer is my company. Go to superme.ai or download the SuperMe app on the App Store and try the product, right? Give feedback, ask KCI questions, try perspective search, message me, on SuperMe, or email me at casey@superme.ai with any feedback you have, good, bad, ugly. It's all extremely valuable.
Amazing. And then the last question is, we've added this thing called Gratitude Corner. I'm sure there's a million people who you could think of, kind of expressing some gratitude towards as part of this journey. But is there like someone that you stands out to you over the last, call it, a few years of your founder journey, or even earlier in your previous chapter, who you just want to take a moment and thank? You can list a few if you want, but just like a few people that might stand out.
I'll go at the very beginning of my career, actually. So the early 2000s were a pretty rough go for my family. I was in Chicago at the time doing undergrad at Loyola, and in a series of a couple years, there was the stock market crash. My mom and my grandmother passed away in the same week, and then Hurricane Katrina wiped away our home. And I was graduating while managing a lot of that stuff going on at home back in New Orleans, and I got so much support that I didn't even fully understand at the time from a few cousins of mine in Chicago. One of whom, Kevin Doyle, introduced me to the head of marketing at apartments.com, which he had just joined us as the head of sales. And so I did an internship there, and they were, of course, very supportive of the issues going on back home, which I would need to go home and handle. And then the day after I graduated, one of the people left the marketing team. So they asked me to come back and like intern again, and that ended up turning into a full-time job. And I was basically the youngest person there by like 6 years or something. So I was working originally for the head of marketing, Mike Ricciardelli, and that was a really great learning experience of like all of these ways that you grew products online that I didn't learn about any of them, in my undergrad marketing courses, like SEO and AdWords and affiliate marketing and email and all that kind of stuff. And so many people, and then so many people on that team who were helpful in teaching me how all this stuff worked, and helped build like this amazing foundation, for my career at a time where like I didn't really have the network. I didn't really have a stable home to go back to, any of that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of, if you don't have the perfect, oh, I went to Stanford, I got perfect grades, all that kind of stuff, the early beginning of your career, that's the hardest to like get right and actually set you on a path where you can actually be capable of doing like amazing things. And, if I didn't have, that hookup from Kevin to meet Mike and to get that internship at apartments.com, yeah, I don't know like that I'd been in a position to do anything meaningful later on in my life. So it kind of goes back to that and all the support I got, during that period of time, which was like just a pretty strange time. I mean, bigger deal for my family than for me. But yeah, if without that, I don't know that I've been in a position to even like have a career in tech.
Thank you for sharing that. That sounds like a super challenging time. And yeah, Kevin and Mike, and maybe we'll follow up. And if there's any other names from that period that you want us to kind of include as like the gratitude corner in the show notes, we'd be happy to list them. And yeah, those early career champions and advocates, and just like people that get you going and get you on your way. Just like, man, I love that you went there. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, and another important thing about that was I was at that company for a few years, and then I got the offer to go to Grubhub, which at the time was, 15 people. It had raised $1 million, and I had a conversation with Kevin, and I was like, "Yeah, this opportunity, I'm considering it." I'm like, "You probably think it's crazy," and he's like, "I don't think it's crazy at all. You should do it." To have someone be like, "Yeah, you should go take this leap at a startup. You should leave the company I work at to go do it." That was, yeah, that was extremely, extremely
Yeah.
comforting, to get that. So yeah, just very
You were
impactful
lucky to have a Kevin. I wish everyone had a Kevin. That sounds like a
for
great
sure.
person in your life. Mark, were you going to say something else, or
No,
no?
I love this ending. Um,
That's the
thank
perfect.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you so much, Casey. I know you're super busy for making the time. I had a
Thank
lot of
you
fun with this
guys. Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
cool. That's a wrap.